With us once again in the studio is Dr. John Young.
Now, he is a practicing physician and also the Assistant Professor of Clinical Medicine at the University of West Virginia. Good evening, John.
Welcome to the studio, John.
And thank you for joining us again this week.
John, I'd like to open by asking you exactly what you're doing in South Africa and how you're going about it.
Well, I'm getting away from the cold up in North America. Sure. But the reason I'm here is the Transvaal Education Department has asked me to come and speak in the high schools to teenagers about sex, what's happening in their bodies.
Yeah.
What they're finding, and what I'm also finding as I'm talking to teenagers, is that they are not getting sex education from their parents, which I think is really sad. They're getting it from the locker room, the magazines, their friends.
So, John, sex education, as much as it's effective when they get it from school or from the parents, what about the unlucky children that don't go to school and don't really have parents?
Well, all right, let me step back a second. I think the ideal sex education is when the parents give it. What's been neat, probably the neatest thing about my being here is that wherever I've talked in a high school, I hear from the parents, well, the last 3 nights, all we talked about at dinner was sex.
Right.
You know, it's forced parents to take the responsibility.
But
Let me finish, Dawn. I think that is a very good question.
And if you don't have parents?
Right. If you don't have parents or a very dysfunctional family, what do you do? Well, we're seeing that kids are going to their peers, which is not always a good place to get sex education.
Right.
I think a good alternative to the parents then is the school system. And I think the school system has to realize we're in a very sexual society. We're going to have to do something about this.
The one thing that I've experienced in sex education at school is that it's dealt with in a very embarrassing kind of manner, where a woman will come and say, well, you know, a man has got those organs and all that. And if it's dealt with like that, then it's really not going to be effective at all. So is your way of doing it much more open?
I do it, I guess, the terrible American way. I call a spade a spade. I can tell that you all, when I first speak at your schools, are very embarrassed because I talk about a fellow that has gonorrhea and a discharge from his penis. But the thing is, what I'm getting, the teachers are very upset about that, but the students come up to me afterwards and say, you know, finally someone's calling a spade, telling us the way it is.
Well, it's very important because if you're not educated about sex and you go and sleep with your boyfriend and your boyfriend slept with someone else before and he's got AIDS, then you don't know about condoms, you don't know about AIDS, you don't know about anything like that, and you can get pregnant and get AIDS and everything.
Well, I don't know, lots of people talk about it in school, you hear about it from your friends and everybody, and I think it should be like AIDS and that. I don't think there's enough of that. I think more people need to learn about that because they're not sure about what's going to happen to them, and they don't take any precautions when they have sex or anything.
Well, my brother, I've got 2 older brothers who both started having sex when they were very young, which is where I got it from, my brothers. I've got 2 older sisters also, and altogether my whole family is very open about the topic. We can discuss it easily, and we don't try to hide anything about it.
You are not just born with morals and values, you acquire them. And that's why I think sex education should start from the time you are a little at home, right until you even, I'd say, die.
So I think that parents are too shy. In fact, parents are way too shy to talk about sex to their kids. I mean, you do get a few sex education classes in school every now and again, but it ain't enough.
And most of the things I know are from my friends. Sex education in school should be taught on a wide scale as such because it's good for young people to be enlightened about sex education.
Exactly what should be taught in sex education?
Well, I think in sex education, you need to, first of all, teach male-female differences, you know, and call, you know, a penis, a vagina, a vagina. That needs to be made very clear. I think you also need to teach a child what's going on in their bodies. Menstruation, enlarging of the penis. They need to know that. Now, what should be taught? Here's where we've made some changes in the States. It used to be that we would teach them all the sex education, and we would leave it at that. Well, we then had kids coming up and saying, well, I'm going to be sexually active. You know, what do I get involved in? How do I practice safe sex? We've done a little bit of that. But what we've added to our sex education is we've also added this thing called value system or morals. We've actually said to kids, you should not get involved sexually. What is right, what is wrong? And for some people that's very controversial. We're finding we're having some good success with that.
So now, often the physical aspects of sex education have been taught, but obviously emotional aspects are also important.
The emotional aspects are important, but
how to deal with your emotions.
But let me go back just a second. I think it's very important when you start sex education. The New York City school system a few years ago, in the primary school ages, was teaching, Bobby's dad sleeps with Billy's dad, homosexuality, different forms of positions for having sex. When you teach a kid certain things in his primary schools too soon, we found that when he was 14 to 15, he became very inquisitive and would probably get involved sexually. So in the primary schools, we just teach basic male-female anatomy. This is what's happening in the body.
When do you think is a good time to start with the more intense sort of subjects?
We start in the high schools.
No, because it says here, I've got a saying from FAMSA, it says that self-worth education is important in preschool, and that comes in, sex education comes in with self-worth, so maybe they should be taught together.
Well, you can teach a person self-worth, but we don't get into contraceptives,
So John, are you saying that at your primary school level it's unnecessary for a grade 1 to learn how to have sexual intercourse, let's say? Okay. That's totally unnecessary, obviously, and you're going to teach the sort of psychological aspects sort of in the lower grades, that type of thing, so they get a good self-image. And then are you saying that more in the high school level they should be exposed more to the actual sexual act and orgasms, etc., and more
talk about
anatomy.
it, but also I think what we were doing in the stage is we're giving values.
Okay, now John, I think the problem that we're facing here is we're speaking about teen sex education, and obviously we're going to need somebody to teach us that, and society has a problem in that adults almost consider it a big taboo. They feel uncomfortable speaking about sex and about penises and all the rest of it. So how do we go about sorting that out? How do we teach adults to be comfortable with speaking about sex?
I don't know. Tell me. I mean, it's, I've come to South Africa, and first of all, are you even allowed to mention sex? I mean, it is, when I'm talking...
Why are people so embarrassed?
Well, I think it's your culture. In the States, we're a little more open.
I heard that in the States, at the one group of schools, they decided they were going to be completely open, and they handed out condoms to these older kind of age groups, and sexual activity actually increased, and pregnancies increased as well. So maybe there's a limit about how open you should actually be about sex.
Well, I think Alan Guttmacher, a man that started Planned Parenthood, said this years ago. Anytime you give a teenager, contraceptives, he's going to increase his sexual activity. And this is what we're seeing in the States. You see, when you're dealing with a teenager, now you guys, don't stab me in the back here, but teenagers think of one person, themselves.
Right.
And, holding off gratification till later in life, that is not their makeup.
Yeah, sure.
So, we have to be careful what we're telling a teen. We cannot just say, here, act responsibly. I think we really need to say to them, here is how to act responsibly.
So all that shows that there's a big responsibility on sex educators
to educate the young. I think, we've looked at sort of sex education, what we should be getting, and what is obviously the theory, how a teenager should be educated in sex. But let's have a look, what are we actually getting? We're getting a lot of, could it be negative influence from movies, from magazines, from society in general? I know a lot of guys, we exposed to a lot of...
Like good old Madonna.
Is it good? Is
Eddie
it bad?
Murphy.
Tell us about, what are we getting, John?
Well, what you're getting from Madonna and Eddie Murphy is, see that babe out there?
Yeah.
Meet her, take her to dinner, spend 10 Rand on her, and go to bed with her. And the message we're getting is, if it feels good, do it. There are no consequences. Everything's fine.
So people
So
are getting
this is
the
now, have you
idea,
seen that? But that's...
Are people getting the idea that, well, if movie stars can do it, surely I can do it.
Of course, they do.
Yeah.
It's so glamorous.
Well,
why should I listen to these people who come and tell me at school I should lay off? Because look at Eddie Murphy, he's a millionaire. Look at Madonna, she's laughing her way to the bank. So why not me as well?
Yeah,
But if you're watching a movie, you have to realize that it's a fantasy. When you see aliens in a movie, you obviously don't believe that either. I think you have to know what is fantasy and what's reality.
But a lot
That's
of
what
people,
I have
a lot
done.
of people look at movies and they see reality.
And when they see murders the whole time, obviously they're not going to go kill.
Okay,
What I have
guys.
done is that I've come here and just saying, listen, you guys can believe me or not. No problem. The thing is that what I am seeing in my practice, day in and day out, is I'm seeing women and guys that got involved sexually. They now have venereal warts. They now have herpes. Some of them have AIDS.
John, which of the educations are the most effective? I know I get sexual education from my parents and from school and from my peer group. But all teenagers tend to think the peer groups are the most accurate.
Well, because
Never believe what
That's because we
the
talk
peer
with our
group
friends
is the
about it.
#1 influence
Because it's
in
now.
the high school kid's life. Parents are so busy trying to keep the family together, making money, they don't have time to spend with the
And I
kids.
So
think
are you
also
saying, John-
when your parents try and educate you, you think, oh well, you know, they lived, they were teenagers.
dark
No,
ages.
And also-
things have changed since.
But the thing is, what you're getting from your peers, if you guys knew some of the things I have heard, like I had one guy come up to me, Mr. Macho South African male. Well, I'm circumcised, so you can't get any sexually transmitted diseases. You know, I mean, I'm getting things like that.
Very so you're finding a very naive attitude towards sex in South Africa?
Naive and just plain, they do not know.
Now, we're also getting a great amount of input about sexuality from the media, from the press, and from movies and all the rest of that. You know,
think about adverts also.
But yes, they're using sex to sell
you see
everything.
this car and a woman
you know?
there, and you think, oh, I'll get this car and I'll get all these women.
No, they
Now-
use sex to sell everything that isn't even related to sex.
So we're starting to look for sex education from movies and things when we should be getting it elsewhere.
Well, this is, and you are getting it out there in the media.
Well,
Sex
that-
does sell. Sex does sell. You know, let's
I
realize
don't think
that.
so, because in the movies when they have a guy going to bed with 10 girls, they never say to us, oh well, finally he got this disease. It's always he ended up very happy in his life.
Exactly,
He never
there are
got
no
disease.
consequences
And he did
mentioned.
go sleep with 10 people, so they never show the consequences, but they show us the...
But the
I-
media,
I-
because the
I'm
media is giving you a jaded view of sex.
So in other words, it's very glamorized sort of idea.
So-
And would you say this glamorized view of sex we're getting, is that increasing teenage sexual promiscuity?
I think so.
And is that a good or a bad thing?
Well, I think it's terrible.
So then what do you think about censorship?
Well,
And how
let
relevant it
me
is.
go back to Peter's question just for a second in that, you know, people are getting this glamorized view of sex.
Right.
And they're going to act out on it. When you're with the boyfriend, girlfriend, the emotions are running, you're going to remember what you've seen in the movies. And the consequences in the States, increase in teenage pregnancies, school dropouts, sexually transmitted diseases. This is, I think, one of the
So in other words, you're
John,
saying
what-
it's a
something
negative
that's really-
influence. It's a negative influence.
many times, not all the time, but many times.
What bothers me is the fact that a lot of the movies that we see today, 10 years ago would have been considered pornography. And now they're being allowed to go on circuit. They're 2 to 18, sure, but then they come out on video and anyone can see them. And I think
What
that's
about
really
censorship?
negative.
All right.
2 to 18, we talk about that. How effective is censorship?
Well, it was interesting. When I first visited South Africa about 10 years ago, as I was coming through Jan Smuts, the guy at customs says, "Where's your Playboy magazines?" I said, "Well, I don't have it." He said, "All right, you can go through." Came back a few years later. "Well, you can go on through." I said, "Well, aren't you going to look for my Playboy?" He says, "No, but if you want to borrow mine, you can." In other words, society has changed. What I have found is that society decides what you are going to be looking at.
There should be like certain restrictions, but I don't think they should like cut movies because, okay, they can, if they're going to cut movies in, I don't think there should be a restriction. But if they want to put a restriction, I don't think they should cut the movies. And I don't think if you're like over 16, I don't think like 2 to 21, that's ridiculous. I mean, once you're over 16 or whatever, I think you can handle like sex and you have your own views and opinions. You're not going to get influenced.
Well, censorship, yeah, I think that some of the movies are a bit too overrated. I mean, kids do grow up and they're not so narrow-minded. They know about the facts of life and they've got to learn more. So censorship sometimes is quite a problem.
Well, 12's a bit young, but I mean, they shouldn't make it 2 to 21. I mean, maybe 2 to 14 or 2 to 15. Because I mean, 12, about 16 and 17, you know what's going on, and 18 as well.
I feel that these movies, should be banned, and it really gives an impression that sex is something to be toyed around with. And our people, feel that they think that these movies are jokes, and they let us just go through with it, and this is something that's really wrong.
I think in a way it's good to have censorship, that for example in movies, if there's no censorship, then movies are just promoting sex and violence as well.
Say something about the censorship. A lot of things seem irrelevant. For example, you've got a movie that's 2 to 21. Now you think about a guy who goes to the army when he's 18, okay, he sees blood, real blood. He has to kill, he has to learn to kill at least. And then you can't go see a movie like Platoon where you see a war. I mean, that's irrelevant. So obviously censorship isn't working in a way.
But your society has decided that a kid must be at least 21 to emotionally handle that.
And
Do you think...
all right, John, sorry, may I just... Okay,
But
John,
if it's not realistic.
to what extent...
Wait, guys.
To what extent should I, as a teenager, allow society to determine what my morals, what my standpoint towards sex and sexuality is going to be? Because, I mean, we're getting all this misinformation, we're getting all these really deceptive views of what things are really about. To what extent should we really trust, what we're getting from the media and from what's going on around us?
Well, I think right now, if it's in the media, you need to look at it very carefully. I just don't trust the media. It's still best if you can get your sex education or any information about sex from your parents, all right? Don't rely too much on your peers. You're going to have to take it with a grain of salt. It's very tough, though, in today's society to get a good view of sex. Teachers are a great resource, though. Parents and teachers, I would go to them.
John, something that I'm really very concerned about is that there tends to be a couple of teenagers or many teenagers who feel, all right, my parents haven't educated me, so that's an excuse to experiment, to go and watch movies and to be influenced. They actually decide to be influenced by what they see.
Right, and what we're seeing from that is we're seeing kids, they see what's on television or on the movies, and they're acting that out. You had a case in England recently. We've had a case in the United States where kids saw what was happening in the movies, and they did it. Killed a little fella recently.
John, isn't it up to the individual? Because my parents have never taught me anything to do with sex. I know what I know from school, from my surroundings, and I know what I want to know. I know what's wrong and I know what's right.
Okay, so you've made your value system with the information you've got.
So it's very important for the person to decide as well for themselves.
But use your parents, use your teachers,
I
please.
think generally, as a whole society, loves sex, and sex is what sells things. Every single major headline in the newspaper is about who's having an affair with who, and which celebrity is going to bed with which celebrity. And surely, if that kind of thing is what the whole of society is looking at as, good stuff to look at, then that's going to because people are going to think that they're abnormal.
You're going to look at that, and the only thing that I can say is we've been living this in the States for the last 30 years. Look at us. All the sexually transmitted diseases, the big divorce rate, families falling apart. Don't follow our path. If you open up sex completely and it's just a free-for-all, you will pay for it.
Okay, guys, Tessa?
So I was going to say, I think that we have to realize that people who sell newspapers and who make ads to sell certain products aren't concerned about your personal well-being, about your state of mind. They are selling something. That is what it's all about.
And one news editor that we spoke to said that if he puts sex on the headlines, it'll sell like hotcakes.
Now, another big flaw of modern society, is that, we have so much sexual abuse of children, that could have an adverse effect on them in future, in their, when they grow up.
We have seen Ted Bundy. I don't know if you're familiar with the big mass murder in the States. My home state of Florida. Oh, dear. It was very interesting. Right before they put him in the electric chair, what he said was, the thing that got me involved into this mass murdering was pornography.
Really?
What we're finding is that kids are getting involved in pornography, and it carries throughout their life. And it will affect them in their marriage, with child abuse. I mean, it just carries on and
Guys,
on.
I've got some statistics here, some very frightening statistics from the South African police about molestation with sexual intent, and they're really, more than 2,000 in 1992, and that was only the reported ones. So are you saying that these frightening statistics that we are seeing here today in South Africa is as a result of, say, pornography and all these negative influences that obviously companies have taken the initiative to make money by taking advantage of our desires for sexual promiscuous.
We're seeing that when you present pornography, especially to young children, you have certain consequences. And later on, they get a very jaded view of sex. For a while, pornography really gets them excited. And then they'll go to the more sadistic pictures, and then they'll start to act out on that. And it's very, very scary.
So if society got sick of whatever it got sick of before sex, and now sex is a big major thing, don't you think they're going to get sick of sex and now turn to violence? If you look at the movies like Silence of the Lambs, it's cannibalism.
Yes. In other words, the law of diminishing returns we talked about earlier. What excites us for a while, then that gets mundane. Let's go to something else. Society will eventually change from the very sadistic sex. I think in the States, everybody smoked. Then we got sick of it, and society said, hey, we've seen the effects, we're going to change. And now, boy, have we cut out smoking in the States to a great percent. So you guys will eventually come to that when your society says the cost in teenage sexually transmitted diseases, child abuse, sodomy is too great. Then you will change.
So guys, what we really have are all these influences affecting us, but really, how are we equipped to deal with them?
Right. Absolutely, I agree, Dawn. I mean, it's all very well for everyone to be telling us what to do, but if we haven't assimilated these morals and principles into ourselves when we were still young, then how are we going to apply it to our lives now?
I think the thing to realize is that we're sexual beings. God's made us uniquely male and female, and that's great. The thing is, don't let the media, different rock stars, movies, your peers affect how you are going to look at sex and your sexuality. We tend to think, you have to be good looking or super macho before you're really accepted in this society. That's not true. I think you can go to your parents, teachers, get all the information you can, but realize that you can be innocent about sex, but do not be ignorant about your sexuality and who you are and all that sex involves.
So is it then the basic concept of gathering as much information from as diverse sources as possible, and then deciding for yourself what your values and your morals are for you personally?
Correct. And also remember that thousands of years, people have been going through these same emotions and urges and questions. You are no different.
Sorry, I'd like to say something. I have friends who mentioned that even though they know a lot about sex, it hasn't really prevented them sort of being involved. And I myself think that Jesus Christ, for me, was the only way to distinguish between whether I was going to get involved or not.
So their religion comes into play.
Yes. Religion is going to be a big aspect of that. I mean, no doubt.
Yes, but then that also makes me think about role models. I mean, our parents should be our role models, but now we have to look to rock stars and film stars and all the rest of that.
Not exactly. Probably the best role model out there.
So you're saying, but we should still carry on listening to that type of music if we like it, and still watch those movies. We must just be able to differentiate
to be able to
the reality and the fantasy.
Listen to it with a very discerning mind.
I think with an open mind as well.
Right.
Take everything we see with a pinch of salt and realize that not everything we see is the way that it happens in real life.
So is that to differentiate between which news or which information sources are reliable and accurate and which ones aren't?
Yes, and you're going to have to kind of ferret that out yourself.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, thank you very much, John. That was really great. We had a very interesting discussion, hey guys. I learned a lot. I'm sure you guys did as well, and I know the viewers will be looking forward to our next program. So, John, thank you very much, and goodbye.
Good being with you.
Bye.